Hello dear viewers, I once again welcome you to my channel. In our last class we just had an outline of the structure of the cell, and today we are going to start the parts of the cell one by one, and we'll discuss about the cell membrane today. Fine? Now, this cell membrane, as I have told you in the last class, that this cell membrane is the outer covering of the cell. Okay? Suppose this is the cell. Fine? And cell jo hai, this covering, this outer boundary, this protective covering of the cell is called as cell membrane. Okay, this is cell membrane, and this cell membrane, I have told you, is also called as the plasma membrane and plasmalemma. Plasma membrane, plasmalemma. Fine, and this cell membrane jo hai, it is the protective covering of the cell. Okay, now this cell membrane is a semi-permeable membrane. Semi-permeable membrane. This semi-permeable membrane means that it allows certain things to come from outside to inside or from inside to outside, and it does not allow certain things to pass through it, to come from outside to inside or from inside to outside of the cell. So, certain things are allowed by or permitted by the cell membrane, and certain things are not allowed or permitted by the cell membrane. That is why it is called as semi-permeable membrane. Okay, now this cell membrane jo hai, it separates the fluid outside the cell and the fluid inside the cell. We already know that this cell, it contains the fluid inside, which is called as cytosol, or it is also called as intracellular fluid. Okay, intracellular fluid, as this fluid is present inside the cell, so it is called as intracellular fluid, and there is a fluid present outside the cell as well, which is called as extracellular fluid. Fine. Now, the cell membrane, it acts as a barrier between this extracellular fluid and intracellular fluid. Or we can simply say that the cell membrane separates this intracellular fluid from extracellular fluid. Okay, and when we talk about the thickness of the cell membrane, the thickness of cell membrane is 75 to 110 angstrom. Fine, 75 to 110 angstrom. So this is the basic introduction about the cell membrane. Now, we'll see the composition of cell membrane. The composition of what things this cell membrane is composed of. ये cell membrane जो है ये किन चीजों से बनी हुई होती है. Okay, so that is called as the composition of cell membrane. So the major components of this cell membrane which make up this cell membrane are, there are three components. The first one is proteins. Okay, the second thing is lipids, and the third thing is carbohydrates. Fine. So the composition of cell membrane is proteins, lipids, and carbohydrates. Okay, the percentage of proteins in the cell membrane is 55%, and of the lipids is 40%, and of the carbohydrates is 5%. Fine. So the cell membrane is composed of 55% of proteins, 40% of lipids, and 5% of carbohydrates. Okay, so this is simply the composition of cell membrane. Now, talking about the structure of cell membrane, structure of cell membrane was studied by many scientists with the first model, and different models have actually been given about the cell membrane. The first model of the structure of cell membrane was given by Daniel Dawson. Okay, Daniel and Dawson were two scientists in 1935 who gave the first model of cell membrane, which was called as sandwich model of cell membrane. So according to Daniel and Dawson, ये cell membrane होती है, this cell membrane is just like a sandwich having the outer two layers formed of proteins and the central layer of lipids. Okay, तो Daniel and Dawson ने जो है सेल मेम्ब्रेन के बारे में यही कहा कि सेल मेम्ब्रेन जो है ये एक सैंडविच की तरह होती है, और सैंडविच में जो बाहर वाले दो लेयर्स होते हैं वो प्रोटीन से बनी हुई होती है, और सेंट्रल लिपिड जो है दैट इज फॉर्म्ड ऑफ लिपिड्स, सेंट्रल लेयर. फाइन. सो लेकिन जो सेल मेम्ब्रेन का जो स्ट्रक्चर है, इट इज बेस्ट अंडरस्टूड बाय अ मॉडल विच इज कॉल्ड एज फ्लूइड मोज़ेक मॉडल. Fluid Mosaic model. Okay, and this fluid mosaic model जो है, it is accepted till now by all the scientists, and this model was given by two scientists जिनका नाम है Singer and Nicholson. And this model was given in 1972. Okay, तो 1972 में सिंगर एंड निकोलसन ने सेल मेम्ब्रेन का एक मॉडल दिया जिसका नाम रखा गया फ्लूइड मोज़ेक मॉडल. ओके, तो ये फ्लूइड मोज़ेक मॉडल क्यों रखा गया इसका नाम? क्योंकि जो है अकॉर्डिंग टू सिंगर एंड निकोलसन, द लिपिड्स which are present in the cell membrane are in the fluid form, and और जो ये proteins है, they are just like mosaic, this fluid, the fluid of lipids or lipids in the fluid form with the mosaic of proteins. Okay, just like I am giving you the example, just the example of a sea. Okay, तो sea में जो water है, that water is the fluid layer of the cell membrane. Okay, the sea is the fluid of the cell membrane, lipids of the cell membrane, and the icebergs, the islands, they are the proteins of the cell membrane. Okay, so this according to this fluid mosaic model, this cell membrane contains the lipids in the fluid form with the mosaic of proteins. Okay, as I have told you that this cell membrane जो है, it is composed of lipids, proteins and carbohydrates. Now let's discuss about the lipids, the proteins and carbohydrates of the cell membrane. First, let's discuss about the lipids of cell membrane. Okay, so there are many types of lipids actually present in the cell membrane, and there are two major lipids which make up the lipid layer of the cell membrane, or which are present in the cell membrane, and these two lipids are phospholipids and cholesterol. Fine. So phospholipids and cholesterol are the two major lipids which are present in the cell membrane. Okay. let us see how these lipids which are present in the cell membrane are actually arranged in the cell membrane. When we talk about this phospholipid, we must know that this phospholipid का जो structure होता है, the structure of phospholipid is it contains a head and it contains two tails. Okay, and this head जो है, it is the phosphate part, and these two tails are the fatty acids. Fine. There is this, when we talk about the structure of phospholipids, this structure of phospholipids is, it is having a head which is the phosphate part, and it is having the tail which is the fatty acids. Okay, and this phosphate part or the head of the phospholipid is the hydrophilic part, and these tails are hydrophobic part. Okay, so that means that this phosphate part or hydrophilic part is the water soluble, and this fatty acids, which is the hydrophobic part, it is the water hating part. Okay, it is not soluble in water. Fine. So I'll repeat, the phospholipids का जो structure है, they are having the head which is hydrophilic and they are having the hydrophobic tail. Fine. And these phospholipids जो है, they are arranged in the cell membrane in two layers. Okay, so that is why we simply call this cell membrane as phospholipid bilayer. ओके क्योंकि जो ये लिपिड्स फॉस्फोलिपिड्स हमारी सेल मेम्ब्रेन में प्रेजेंट होते हैं, ये दो लेयर्स में प्रेजेंट होते हैं. ओके, व्हाई these phospholipids are arranged in two layers, let me show you. Okay, this is phospholipid, this is second phospholipid, this is third phospholipid, fourth, fifth. Okay, so suppose this is the layer of phospholipids. Okay, and these phospholipids, suppose if they are not arranged in two layers, so what will happen, as I have told you already, that this is the cell membrane, and this cell membrane is having the fluid inside the cell, and there is the fluid present outside the cell. Okay, so if this is arranged in such a fashion, if these phospholipids are arranged in a single layer, so what will happen, either this hydrophobic tail has to face the extracellular fluid, or this hydrophobic tail has to face the intracellular fluid. Okay, as this tail is water hating, so it cannot face neither this extracellular fluid nor it can face the intracellular fluid, because it will run away from the water as it is hydrophobic part. Fine. So there should be two layers of phospholipids, and these phospholipids has to be arranged in such a fashion that this hydrophobic tail जो है, this hydrophobic tail जो है, it does not have to face this intracellular fluid or extracellular fluid. Okay, the head of one layer of phospholipids will face the extracellular fluid, and the head of the other layer of phospholipid will face the intracellular fluid. Okay, and these fatty acids of these two layers will mingle with each other. Okay, so this hydrophilic part and these hydrophilic parts of this phospholipid layer, these hydrophilic parts will face the extracellular fluid from the outside and intracellular fluid on the inside. Okay, so these hydrophobic tails do not have to face extracellular fluid or intracellular fluid. Fine. So these lipids जो है phospholipids, they are arranged in 2 layers in the cell membrane. Okay, so this is phospholipid bilayer. Phospholipid bilayer. Okay, and the second type of lipids which is present in the cell membrane is cholesterol. Okay, and that cholesterol is present in between. Fine, and that cholesterol is present in between, and जो है ये cholesterol का काम होता है ये in phospholipid molecules, it keeps them intact with each other. The function of these cholesterols is that it keeps the phospholipids molecules intact with each other. So there are 2 major lipids which are present in the cell membrane. One is the phospholipids, and phospholipids, the structure of phospholipids is it is having the hydrophilic head and it is having the hydrophobic tail. Okay, and these phospholipids are arranged in 2 layers, and they are arranged in such a fashion that these hydrophobic tails has to face each other, and they do not have to face either extracellular fluid or intracellular fluid. And then in between there are cholesterol molecules, and these cholesterol molecules will keep these phospholipids intact with each other. Okay, so far as the functions of these lipids are concerned, or this phospholipid bilayer is concerned, these lipids जो है, they allow the fat soluble substances to pass through the cell membrane. For example, the oxygen and carbon dioxide. Okay, the oxygen and carbon dioxide, they are fat soluble substances, and these fat soluble substances can easily diffuse through the cell membrane, and they can come from extracellular into intracellular and from intracellular to extracellular fluid. Okay, so that is the function of lipids, that it allows the fat soluble substances to pass through it. Okay, so that is all about lipids. Yes, so now we'll discuss about the proteins of the cell membrane. Okay, as you know that these proteins make up the 55% of the cell membrane. Okay, when we discussed about the functions of lipids, those lipids जो है, they help in the transport, or they help in the diffusion of the fat soluble substances. Okay, now what about the water soluble substances? What about the larger substances having the large molecular weight? Okay, so for the transport of such substances, there are proteins which are present in the cell membrane. Okay, these proteins जो है, there are 2 types of proteins present in the cell membrane. One is integral proteins, and then there are peripheral proteins. Fine. So 2 types of proteins are present in the cell membrane. One is integral proteins, then there is peripheral proteins. Okay, if this is cell membrane, if these are the lipids, phospholipid bilayer, some proteins are completely embedded inside the cell membrane. Okay, and some proteins are present on the surface of the cell membrane or lipid layer on both the sides, okay, which are completely embedded inside, which which are in the entire thickness of the cell membrane, which are present there. They are called as the integral proteins, and the proteins which are present on the surface, either from outside or on the inner surface, they are called as the peripheral proteins. Okay, so there are two types of proteins which are present. One is integral, which are completely embedded in the lipid layer or in the cell membrane, or there are peripheral proteins which are present on the surface of the phospholipid bilayer. Okay, now when we talk about the functions of these proteins, okay, so the main functions, the important functions of the proteins which are present in the cell membrane are: some proteins act as channel proteins, or they act as channels, okay, and they form a channel for the larger molecules or for the water soluble substances. Okay, so for the transport of water soluble substances or for the larger molecules, these proteins act as channels. Okay, and these are also called as transport proteins. And then some proteins act as pumps, and these proteins which act as pumps, they help in the transport of charged particles or the ions. Okay, and some proteins they act as, or they form enzymes which help in the different metabolic activities or metabolic reactions. Okay, and some proteins, they act as antigens, and these antigens they initiate the process of antibody formation. Okay, so these are the very important functions of proteins. The proteins present in the cell membrane are of two types. One is integral proteins, which are present inside the cell membrane, and then there are peripheral proteins which are present on the surface of the cell membrane, either from inside or on the outside of the cell membrane. Okay, the functions: some of the proteins act as channels, and they help in the transport of water soluble substances or the larger molecules. Some proteins act as pumps, and they help in the transport of ions or charged particles. Some proteins they form the enzymes which help in the various metabolic reactions, and some proteins act as antigens which initiate the process of antibody formation. Okay, then when we talk about the carbohydrates of the cell membrane, these carbohydrates usually are attached to either lipids or to proteins. Okay, कार्बोहाइड्रेट्स जो सेल मेम्ब्रेन में प्रेजेंट होते हैं, या तो वो प्रोटीन्स के साथ अटैच रहते हैं या तो वो लिपिड्स के साथ अटैच रहते हैं. So they are present in the form of either glycolipids or they are present in the form of glycoproteins. Glycoproteins or glycolipids. Okay, so these carbohydrates जो है, इनका जो function है, the main function, they form a thin covering on the entire surface of the cell membrane. If this is cell membrane, and on the entire surface of cell membrane, they form a thin covering, and that covering is called as glycocalyx. So what is glycocalyx? It is a thin covering which is formed by the carbohydrates on the entire surface of the cell membrane. ओके एंड ये जो ग्लाइकोकैलिक्स है, जब सेल्स, बहुत सारी सेल्स जो हमने पहली क्लास में डिस्कस किया था, बहुत सारी सेल्स जो है जब आपस में मिलती है, दे फॉर्म द टिश्यू एंड फॉर द टाइट फिक्सेशन ऑफ दीज सेल्स दिस ग्लाइकोकैलिक्स प्लेज एन इम्पॉर्टेंट रोल. Okay, so glycocalyx जो है, it is the thin covering which is formed by the carbohydrates on the entire surface of the cell membrane. Okay, so now we know about the lipids, about the carbohydrates, about the proteins of the cell membrane and their basic functions. Fine. Now let us discuss about the functions of cell membrane in general. Fine. Functions of cell membrane. So cell membrane का जो पहला function है, that is protection. As we know that the cell membrane is a protective covering which protects the cell membrane. So the first basic function of cell membrane is the protection, that it provides the protection to the cell, it provides the protection to all the cell organelles which are present inside the cell. Fine. Then the second function is absorption. Okay, absorption means all the nutrients which are needed by the cell, those nutrients has to reach inside the cell so they will be utilized, and those nutrients are absorbed inside, and that absorption is done by the cell membrane. And the third function is the exchange of gases. Exchange of gases. Okay, we already know that all the cells need oxygen for their survival. Okay, and the carbon dioxide is produced inside the cell that needs to be eliminated. So there is exchange of the gases, there is exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide, and that exchange of gases occurs through the cell membrane. So this is another important function of cell membrane. Then another function is excretion. Okay, another important function is excretion. और ये excretion जो है, we know that the cell जो है, it eliminates all the waste products or the carbon dioxide from the cell, and this elimination or this excretion occurs through the cell membrane. Okay, so these are the very basic and important functions of the cell membrane. First one is it provides the protection, the absorption of many things occurs through the cell membrane, the exchange of gases occurs through cell membrane, and the excretion of waste products also occurs through cell membrane. Okay, so that was all about cell membrane. I hope you enjoyed today's class, and I hope I was able to make you understand the basics of cell membrane. Please like and share this video, and if you have not subscribed the channel yet, please subscribe, and all your suggestions are most welcome in the comment section. Thank you.